What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix for Week 15 of the 2021 CFL season. I'm Ryan Coop here with your depth chart update for this week of CFL Fantasy. Only one depth chart update video this time around because all of the lineups are out already at this point, so might as well do it all at once. Your one-stop shop for locking in your lineups. Of course, if you missed it, go back and check out the positional previews I released earlier this week, going through the best and worst option at each position you can pick from. Week number 15 starts off tonight on Friday with, I believe, a doubleheader. And then we have two games on Saturday as well. A couple key matchups here and a couple rematches from the week before as well. So let's dive right in and take a look at the depth chart, starting with the Friday night games. It starts off with the big East Division matchup between the Toronto Argonauts and the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Let's take a look at Toronto's depth chart here first. Most notable there for the Argos, DJ Foster is back from injury and will get the start at running back. John White went down against the Red Blacks last week and is out this game. So DJ Foster gets the start. AJ Ouellette, who came in once White went down, put up 100-yard rushing, I believe, will be the backup at running back. So will we still see perhaps a dual back system? I think there is potential there, but the bulk of the reps should be going in Foster's direction. At quarterback, it's McLeod Bethel Thompson once again, with Antonio Pipkin as the backup, and looks like pretty much the same group of receivers as last week for Toronto. You've got Drez Anderson, DeVaris Daniels, Ricky Collins Jr., Curley Gittins Jr., and Dejon Brissett as your starters. You also have Chandler Worthy as a backup behind Collins Jr. and will likely be handling the return duties once again this week. And Jawan Brescison listed as a backup behind Dejon Brissett there as well. So some changes at the running back position, but pretty much the same lineup as last week for the Argos as they get ready for this matchup with the Ticats. Looking at the Hamilton side of things, big change this week. Don Jackson is out for the Ticats after, two really good weeks in a row. Bit of an injury this week, so he will not play. Sean Thomas Erlington does get the start at the running back position again with Malik Irons and Jackson Bennett lined up behind him. We saw this formation many times earlier this year. I'm a bit cautious on Thomas Erlington because he hasn't, exactly lit up a game yet this year. I think there is going to be a bit of a timeshare of, maybe Irons gets a couple carries here and there, and some of the receivers as well. So, you need about 14 points for him to hit full value this week. I could see him coming in somewhere around the 10-ish point mark. So close, but I don't think necessarily a green light option as a starter now. At quarterback, it's Jeremiah Mazzoli, playing great football as of late, so of course he gets the start again with Dane Evans as the backup. At receiver, the usual crew, still no Braylon Addison, so it's Stephen Dunbar Jr., Jalen Acklin, Brandon Banks, Tim White, and David Ungerer III as your starters. Tyler Turnowski, a backup behind David Ungerer. And handling return duties this week, Brandon Banks, the main guy, David Ungerer III as the backup there. So pretty consistent lineup for Hamilton. Just that one change at running back this week for them as well. Getting into the second game on Friday, a key West Division playoff matchup between the BC Lions and the Calgary Stampeders. BC needs a win here to stay alive in the playoff hunt. And looks like they're leaning heavy on Lucky Whitehead to try to do so because he will, on top of his usual role as the go-to receiver, be handling kick return duties for the Lions this week. They've rotated, a couple different guys. Chris Rainey, James Butler had some return duties earlier this year. Shaq Cooper, before he was released. Quadri Henderson took care of that role last week. So, but now it's Lucky Whitehead will be the main guy there. So that is a nice little boost, I think, probably a couple of points in that direction on top of what he's getting at receiver. I do like the potential play of him this week. I think BC's really going to lean on him, to try to keep the playoff hopes alive. They've been most successful when they've put the ball in his hands. So could be a good day for one Lucky Whitehead, and it could be your lucky day if you put him in your lineup. I'm certainly considering putting him in mine. Michael Riley starts at quarterback. Nathan Rourke is the backup there as usual. James Butler as the starter at running back, and Jamel Lyles, recently brought back in, will be the backup there, but expect Butler to get the bulk of the carries there. At receiver, Keon Hatcher gets back onto the active roster, but is listed as a third string behind Dominic Rhymes and Jacob Scarfoni. So I could see Hatcher either being, the late scratch in this game, or getting in for very few plays there. So the crew at receiver this week: no DeVere Posey still, no Lamar Durant either. You've got Lucky Whitehead, Brian Burnham, Javon Catoy, Dominic Rhymes, and Shaq Johnson as your starters at the receiver position for BC. Looking at the Calgary side of this matchup, they do get a huge addition at the receiver position with newly re-added Reggie Begelton making his first start since returning from the NFL. He will slot into the lineup. If you missed it earlier this week, the Stampeders letting Josh Huff go to make room for Begelton. So Huff, usually played on that wideout spot. Looks like that is a spot that is going to be taken by Begelton this week as he gets back in for his first game. I'm excited to see what he can do for Calgary. I don't think his fantasy price tag of over $10,000 is worth it in his first start, but we'll see how heavily they try to lean on him. So he gets into the lineup. Malik Henry is back onto the active roster as his backup, and Sean Bain is off the active roster, which, Calgary never lists who the kick returner is on the depth chart, but I would presume that means Malik Henry will be handling return duties for them this week. Bo Levi Mitchell starts at quarterback, Jake Mayer the backup. Of course, Kadeem Carey, the starting running back, Ante Milanovic-Litre lined up behind him. Receivers, starting crew: Reggie Begelton, Markeith Ambles, Kamar Jordan, Richie Sindani, and Herji Mayala. I mentioned Malik Henry's a backup, Colton Hunchak is as well, and same thing with Tyson Middlemost. So pretty consistent lineup here for Calgary from what we saw the past few games, with the notable switch of Huff for Begelton. Getting into the Saturday games here, it starts off with an early one between the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the Montreal Alouettes, and oh boy, this is quite the lineup change for Winnipeg this week. They have first place locked up already, so they are resting a number of players this week, including starting quarterback Zach Collaros. Sean McGuire will get the start at quarterback. Drew Brown will be the backup. Collaros not on the roster, so it should be a healthy dose of Sean McGuire. I said this on Twitter earlier this week: $5,000 starting quarterback who loves to run with the ball. Yeah, sign me up. Put him in the lineup. He will be my quarterback for this week for sure. Other changes along the offense: Shaq Cooper gets in for his first game for the Bombers. He'll be the third string at running back, but will be handling return duties this week in place of Janarian Grant, who is out of the lineup. So Shaq Cooper gets in, Grant is out. Kelvin McKnight comes back onto the active roster, but will be a backup behind Nick Dembski. Starting receiver crew: Darvin Adams, Rasheed Bailey, Nick Dembski, Kenny Lawler, Drew Wolotarski. So the same crew as usual, but you've got McKnight and you've got O'Leary Orange as two backups there that I think could potentially, get in for a couple of plays if the Bombers get ahead in this one. They've also got some changes along the offensive line. Jamarcus Hardricks missed the last couple of games. They get him back in. Pat Neufeld gets to sit this one out and get a bit of a rest here. Stanley Bryant is listed as a backup on the offensive line, which I don't believe he's injured, so I'm presuming that means they're trying to give him a bit of a rest here as well. So a couple of changes there along the offensive line for them this week. And then the big changes on the defensive side of the ball: no Deatrick Nichols, no Brandon Alexander, no Jackson Jeffcoat, no Steven Richardson, no Nick Taylor. They're resting quite a few guys on the defensive side of the ball this week, the Bombers are. So that I mean, looking at the defensive depth chart, this team is very deep. It still looks like a very solid defense, so I wouldn't necessarily, their defense has been so good this year that you never really pick team players from teams going against them. It might be a little more susceptible to that this week, but this is still a very stacked defense here, and I think I'd be cautious of leaning heavily on the Alouettes in this one. I think this is going to be a closer matchup than people than may seem, given the number of guys the Bombers are resting here. And I'm excited to see what this squad can do despite the lineup changes. The other side of this game, the Montreal Alouettes are sticking with Trevor Harris as the starting quarterback once again this week. Matt Schultz not on the roster, so Shea Patterson is the backup. Only notable change I see here for Montreal, Martese Jackson, brought in a couple weeks ago to handle return duties. Missed last game, I think, maybe the game before due to an injury. He is back now on the game day roster. So Martese Jackson will be handling return duties in the revolving door at that position. I think it's changed every single week who is handling returns for Montreal. They've had a lot of bad luck at that position. I mentioned the starting quarterback, Trevor Harris. William Stanback is the starting running back, of course. Cameron Artis-Payne is off the game day roster this week. Jushran Antwi will be the backup running back, as we saw earlier this year. And the receivers are your usual crew there. Eugene Lewis, Jake Weineke, Quan Bray, Reggie White Jr., and Keon Julian Grant. Defensive side of the ball, pretty consistent from last week as well for Montreal. And then your final game of the week, the rematch between Edmonton and Saskatchewan. Let's start with the Riders first. Only real change here from last week. Kick returner Rashard Davis is out of the lineup, and Jamal Morrow, backup third string running back, kick returner, handled return duties earlier this season. He is back at the kick return job this game. So we will see what that means for the return game for the Riders. He had a bit of success earlier this season, but nothing major. Just checked CFL Fantasy site. He is not available as a player at this time quite yet, but I'm assuming will be at the running back position once he'll be available before the games on Saturday. Probably coming in at a cheap price, around $2,500. Rest of the starting offense is the same. Kyron Moore is still out for a while. Cody Fajardo starts at quarterback. William Powell starts at running back. Shaq Evans, Ricardo Lewis, Braden Lenius, Duke Williams, and Keon Schaefer-Baker are your starters at receiver, as we've seen. We also have Justin McInnes and Jake Hardy as backups at that position. So pretty consistent offense here for the Riders. We'll see if they can get things going a little more after a couple weeks of a bit of struggles there to light it up on offense. And then we get into the Edmonton roster this week. First of 3 games in the next 6 to 7 days for the Elks. Taylor Cornelius does get the start again in this one at quarterback. Nick Arbuckle is not on the roster quite yet. So Cornelius starts. Dakota Prukop is the backup. Still missing again for the second straight game for the Elks are James Wilder Jr., Greg Ellingson, and Darrell Walker. Add to the injured list this week as well wide receiver Mike Jones and running back kick returner Terry Williams. So they'll line up as follows. I mentioned Cornelius starts at quarterback. Walter Fletcher starts at running back again. Had a great week for them last week. At receiver are Monty Edwards, Ernest Edwards, who was a backup last week. He gets a start. Jalen Tolliver, Shai Ross, and Tavon Smith are your starters at receiver. Danny Vandervoort is a backup. He was the one who came in late in that game last week, put up 2 touchdowns, had himself a 20 fantasy point week. Will be a backup again this week. So I still say be a little cautious in that regard. I'm not buying another big performance necessarily from him. Ernest Edwards will be handling return duties as well. So cheap receiver, gets the start at the receiver position and is handling returns. Could be a potential play there. Although typically Elks return guys do not put up a ton of points in the return game. So those are your notables when it comes to the lineups for this week across the board. Make sure you get those rosters set. Game number 1 kicks off 6:30 p.m. Central Time tonight, and make sure you get those in before then. I hope you have a great week of CFL Fantasy. I hope you crush it, and we see you at the top of the leaderboard by the end of the week. I hope you have a great weekend in general. And quick note on next week for the Fantasy Fix. First game of the week comes Tuesday between Edmonton and Toronto. And the Elks play 2 games next week, which presumably means they'll count for double points. So week starts a lot earlier than normal, Tuesday night, which means I will try to get all of your previews, positional previews, out on Monday for the week to help you start locking in your lineups based on that. And then I'll have the depth chart update for that first game. And then later on in the week, once we get closer to the weekend, I'll have the depth chart updates for those other games as well. So that's the plan for next week as we get ready to round out the 2021 CFL season. Exciting times. Playoffs on the way. I'll be doing fantasy talk all throughout the playoffs here as well. Do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't. If you have any fantasy questions, put them in the comments section or tweet them at me at CooperTrooper42 on Twitter. There's a link to that in the description. I have also tweeted out all the depth charts for the week, so if you missed anything in the video, you can go check them out there as well. And if you want to play CFL Fantasy alongside myself and other viewers, there's a link in the description to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix group over on the official CFL Fantasy site. Play alongside myself and others this week and the rest of the 2021 season. As always, thanks for watching. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.